CMY beloved child. Before this moment slips away, quiet everything around you. Something happened today in a room so ordinary that no one else would have noticed it. No thunder crossed the sky. No door suddenly opened. No voice called out from the hallway. There was only an old wooden drawer, a forgotten sweater, and the person whose heart has been trying desperately to convince itself that it no longer misses you. But the instant they lifted that sweater into the light, the entire room changed. They had not been searching for you. At least, that is what they told themselves. They were looking for something simple to wear, something warm enough for the coolness gathering outside the window. Their hands moved through folded clothes without emotion until their fingers touched fabric they had avoided for far too long. The sweater was resting beneath everything else, hidden as though someone had deliberately buried it there. The color had faded slightly. One sleeve was folded inward. A loose thread hung near the cuff. And yet, they recognized it immediately. Their hands stopped. For several seconds, they did not breathe normally. They simply stood there with the drawer open, staring at the sweater as if it had remembered something they had spent months trying to forget. What happened next was not dramatic to the outside world. But inside them, a locked door moved. They almost placed the sweater back. Their fingers even began lowering it into the drawer. Then an unexpected thought crossed their mind: why have I been avoiding this? That question unsettled them because they already knew the answer. It was never the sweater they were avoiding. It was you. More precisely, they were avoiding the version of themselves that existed when you were close. The version that laughed more freely, hoped more bravely, and did not have to pretend that everything was fine. That version of them had been folded away with the sweater, hidden beneath responsibilities, pride, unfinished conversations, and all the explanations they never found the courage to give you. They lifted it again. Morning light touched the fabric. Dust drifted through the narrow beam coming from the window, and for one suspended instant, time seemed to soften around them. The world outside continued moving, but their heart had already gone somewhere else. Then they put it on. At first, nothing happened. They pulled one sleeve over their arm, then the other. They adjusted the collar. They glanced at their reflection and almost smiled at how familiar it looked. The sweater still fit, though differently than before. It carried the shape of an earlier season, a time when your name did not feel so difficult to hold inside their mouth. They turned away from the mirror. And then your scent reached them. Faint. Nearly impossible. Yet unmistakable to their heart. It was not simply perfume, soap, rain, or the softness of clean fabric. It was the emotional memory of you. It was the feeling of standing near someone who could see behind their careful smile. It was warmth without explanation. It was the strange peace they once felt when you entered a room, even if neither of you said what was truly happening between you. Their eyes closed before they could stop them. The scent rose from the collar, and suddenly the present disappeared. A forgotten moment returned with astonishing clarity, your voice nearby, light falling across your face, the sound of movement around you, and the quiet way their attention kept returning to you no matter how hard they tried to look elsewhere. They remembered a conversation that had seemed unimportant at the time. They remembered your expression changing when you realized they were not saying everything. Most of all, they remembered how safe your presence felt. That realization overwhelmed them because they had spent so long telling themselves that what they missed was only familiarity. They believed time would soften it. They believed distance would make the truth smaller. They believed that if they filled their days with enough noise, work, obligations, and other voices, your absence would eventually become ordinary. But the sweater revealed what their pride had concealed. They did not merely miss the memories. They missed who they were with you. That was the first truth. The second was even harder. Their hand moved to the collar as though touching the fabric could somehow steady them. Their breathing changed. Their eyes remained closed, but now they were no longer remembering one moment. They were remembering everything at once, the conversations that ended too early, the messages they typed and erased, the nights they checked their phone hoping your name might appear, and the mornings they woke determined not to think of you. They remembered the last time they acted distant when what they truly wanted was reassurance. They remembered the sentence they almost said. They remembered the way you waited. And they remembered how they allowed silence to answer for them. A quiet ache moved across their face. No one was there to witness it. No one saw the strength leave their shoulders as they sat on the edge of the bed. No one heard the whisper that escaped them when your name finally crossed their lips. But they said it. Your name had not sounded like that in a long time. It was not spoken casually. It was not spoken in frustration. It was spoken like someone opening a letter they had been afraid to read because they already knew it contained the truth. The room became still. Outside, wind moved gently through the trees. Somewhere beyond the glass, life continued without understanding that a heart had just stopped running from itself. And this is where the story changes. Because earlier that same morning, before they found the sweater, your soulmate had made a decision. They had decided to remove the last reminders of you. Not because their feelings were gone, but because the feelings had become too difficult to carry without an answer. They were tired of pretending not to care and equally tired of hoping in secret. They told themselves they needed a fresh beginning. They gathered old photographs, small keepsakes, forgotten receipts, and objects tied to moments they could no longer revisit. The sweater was supposed to be placed in a box. That box was supposed to be sealed. By evening, they intended to move it somewhere they would never have to see it again. But something inside them could not place the sweater with the other things. Why? Because the moment your scent reached them, they understood that they were not preparing to release a dead memory. They were trying to silence a living feeling. There is a difference. A memory asks to be honored. A living feeling asks to be answered. Your soulmate sat there wearing the sweater while this realization unfolded slowly inside them. They looked toward the box on the floor. It was half filled with pieces of a story they had told everyone was finished. Yet nothing in their expression looked finished now. They reached for one photograph. Then another. Their thumb moved across the edge of an image without touching the faces. The tenderness in that small movement revealed more than words could have. They were not looking at the past with bitterness. They were looking at it with the grief of someone who had finally realized how much beauty was hidden inside moments they once took for granted. Perhaps you have wondered whether they remember. They do. They remember details you believed had vanished from their mind. They remember the way you tried to make things easier when you were hurting too. They remember how you listened when they could not explain themselves. They remember a certain look in your eyes, the look that silently asked whether you were safe inside their heart. At the time, they did not know how to answer. Now they do. But an answer discovered late carries its own weight. They lowered the photograph and pressed both hands against the sweater. The scent had already begun fading into the air, and that frightened them more than they expected. They leaned closer to the collar, searching for what remained, as though one more breath could bring back everything they had lost. That is when the first tear fell. Not loudly. Not theatrically. It simply appeared, crossed their cheek, and disappeared into the fabric. Then another followed. They tried to laugh at themselves. They shook their head and whispered that it was only an old sweater. But their heart refused to accept the lie. Fabric does not make someone grieve like that. Memory does not shake a soul unless something within it is still asking to be healed. And somewhere deep inside them, one question rose above all the others. Did I lose the person I was meant to be honest with? They did not know the answer. That uncertainty was what truly overwhelmed them. Because your soulmate has been carrying a private fear. It is not merely the fear that you have moved forward. It is the fear that you finally learned to live without the love they were too guarded to give you openly. They wonder whether someone else now hears the laughter they once heard. They wonder whether another person notices your quiet moods, understands your pauses, or knows when you are saying, "I'm fine," because you do not want to burden anyone. They wonder if they waited too long. The sweater brought all of that to the surface. Yet something else was happening. Something even they did not understand. While sitting there, they felt an unexpected peace beneath the emotion. It did not erase the ache, but it changed its meaning. For the first time, remembering you did not feel like punishment. It felt like direction. Like a light appearing at the end of an empty road. Like the first star visible after a long evening. Like a door they assumed was locked, revealing that it had never been fully closed. That peace reminded them of a biblical truth they once overlooked: the lost thing is not always gone forever. Sometimes it is waiting to be recognized. The shepherd searches for the one that wandered. The woman lights a lamp for the coin hidden in the shadows. The waiting father keeps watching the road because love does not stop looking simply because distance has lasted longer than expected. Your soulmate suddenly understood that love and pride had been pulling them in opposite directions. Pride told them to remain silent. Love told them to tell the truth. Pride reminded them of every misunderstanding. Love reminded them of your eyes. Pride said that too much time had passed. Love asked, what if this moment has arrived precisely because time has finally taught you what your heart could not understand before? They stood from the bed. The movement was sudden, almost urgent. They walked toward the window and looked outside, but they were not truly seeing the street, the trees, or the changing sky. They were looking into the possibility of a future they had refused to imagine. A future in which they spoke honestly. A future in which they did not hide behind vague words. A future in which you finally heard what their silence had been covering. Their reflection appeared faintly in the glass. The old sweater surrounded them like an echo of another life. They looked at themselves and whispered, "Why today?" The question hung in the room. Why had they chosen this sweater today? Why had your scent remained after so much time? Why did the memory feel stronger now, just as they had decided to put everything away? They could have called it coincidence. For several minutes, they tried. But their heart had another explanation. Perhaps the sweater had not returned to make them live in the past. Perhaps it had returned to show them what the past was still trying to teach them. Perhaps the emotion was not asking them to retreat into regret. Perhaps it was asking them to become courageous enough to stop repeating the same silence. That distinction mattered. Restoration does not always begin with a grand reunion. Sometimes it begins in an empty room when one person finally admits, "I still care." Sometimes healing begins before either person sees it. You may have been carrying your own unanswered questions. You may have wondered whether your prayers disappeared into the night, whether your tears mattered, or whether the love you gave was misunderstood. There may have been moments when financial pressure, family tension, loneliness, or simple exhaustion made you feel as though your heart had no space left for another unanswered hope. But this fictional journey holds a gentle reminder for you. Your worth was never determined by another person's delay. Their silence did not make you forgettable. Their confusion did not make you difficult to love. Their inability to name their emotions did not make your love imaginary. You were not foolish for caring deeply. You were learning how much tenderness your heart could hold. And even now, whatever happens next, you are not being called to chase, plead, or abandon your peace. You are being invited to recognize that what is meant to heal must come toward truth willingly. Your soulmate has begun moving toward that truth. But there is something they have not yet told you. The scent did more than remind them of your presence. It brought back one exact evening, the evening everything between you began to change. There had been words left unfinished that night. They had wanted to stop you before you turned away. They had wanted to explain why they suddenly became distant, why their warmth disappeared behind caution, and why they acted as if the connection meant less than it did. You may have believed they pulled away because they felt nothing. The truth was almost the opposite. They felt too much, too quickly, and it exposed every part of them that had learned to survive by remaining guarded. Your kindness frightened them because it felt real. Your patience frightened them because it made their excuses visible. Your presence frightened them because, around you, they could imagine a life that required them to become emotionally honest. So they retreated. Not from your worth. From their own vulnerability. That does not erase the impact of what happened. It does not excuse the confusion their actions created. Yet it reveals why the sweater affected them so deeply. Your scent carried them back to the last moment when honesty was still within reach, and showed them that the moment had not disappeared from their heart. They walked back toward the bed. Their phone was resting beside the box. The screen was dark, but they stared at it as though it were asking a question. Your contact was still there. They knew exactly where to find it. They had visited it more times than you would imagine, sometimes late at night, sometimes during crowded afternoons, sometimes after hearing a song or seeing something they knew you would understand. They would open your contact. Read your name. Then close it again. Today was different. They picked up the phone. Their thumb hovered above the screen. A dozen fears appeared at once. What if you did not answer? What if you had changed? What if hearing from them reopened something you had worked hard to heal? What if you responded politely but without the warmth they remembered? Then came the most painful fear of all. What if you had been waiting, and their continued silence became the final reason you stopped? They sat down again. The sweater still carried the faint trace of you, but now it seemed to be fading faster. They realized they could not keep searching old fabric for a closeness that required a living conversation. If they wanted to know whether anything remained between you, they would have to risk hearing the truth. Their thumb touched your name. Your contact opened. For a moment, the screen illuminated their face. They scrolled through messages they had not allowed themselves to revisit. Some were simple. Some were warm. Some contained emotions hidden beneath ordinary words. Then they reached the final conversation. Their eyes stopped on your last message. They read it once. Then again. The words were not cruel. That somehow made them more powerful. You had not attacked them. You had not demanded anything. You had simply left a small opening for honesty. At the time, they did not step through it. Now they could see exactly what that opening had cost you. Their expression changed. They began typing. The first sentence was an apology. They erased it. The second was an explanation. They erased that too. The third began with your name, followed by the words, "I found something today." They stared at the message but did not send it. Because something was not enough. They had not merely found a sweater. They had found the truth beneath all their avoidance. They had found proof that emotional distance does not always mean the heart has moved on. They had found the version of themselves that once knew exactly who mattered and then allowed fear to speak louder. How could they fit all of that into a message? They placed the phone down. For a moment, it seemed as though the old pattern would win again. Their shoulders lowered. Their gaze fell. Silence waited beside them like a familiar companion. Then something slipped from the sweater. A tiny folded piece of paper landed near their foot. They froze. The paper had been hidden inside the inner pocket, so deeply pressed into the lining that they had forgotten it was there. Its edges were softened with age. One corner carried a faint mark. They leaned down slowly and picked it up. Before opening it, they already sensed that it belonged to the season when you were close. Their fingers trembled. The paper unfolded once. Then twice. There was handwriting inside. Their handwriting. They had written those words long ago, perhaps during the very period when their feelings for you were becoming impossible to ignore. They had tucked the note away and forgotten it, but time had preserved the confession their fear never allowed them to deliver. The first line read, "If I ever find this again, I need to stop pretending." Your soulmate covered their mouth. The room seemed to tilt around them. Below that line was a confession. One they had never spoken to you, one that explained why they withdrew when the connection became deeper, and one that proved your scent was connected to a promise they had made privately on the last evening they wore that sweater. They read the confession in silence. Then they looked at your contact again. This time, they did not begin typing. They pressed the button to record a voice message. A small timer appeared on the screen. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Their breathing filled the recording before their words did. Then, wearing the sweater that still carried the faintest trace of you, they finally spoke. "I don't know if I still have the right to tell you this," they whispered, "but I found the note, and what I wrote about you that night changes the reason you thought I left." Their voice broke. They looked down at the final hidden line on the paper, the line that contained the truth you were never supposed to discover. And then they said your name, followed by the confession that could change everything between you. "The real reason I walked away was because